I come from a restaurant background, and yes, I know some legal aid in my world, but this is pretty impressive what this whole organization does and what they stand for. So it's a real pleasure being here this evening. But yes, my background is unique. I graduated from DAP. I have a design degree from Cincinnati here at the College of Creative Studies. And my focus was on furniture. Started up in Detroit, came down here. While I was in school, I needed to pay bills, as we all do. And I thought the restaurant world was the easiest way to do that. And it was interesting because I found a second family. And before you know it, I finished my degree, and probably completely against my parents' views of the way they wanted my life to go, I walked away from that degree and started really diving into the world of hospitality, which is something that I think is very important in the world, especially going through COVID. But it's been fun. My business, has kind of been rocked just like everyone else's. But what I love is the community that the restaurant world supports. So I was general manager and sommelier for Boca Restaurant Group for over 10 years, and ran the restaurant out of Oakley, helped David Falk kind of grow it to what it is today. Left for a while, went and worked with John Ribera Gauls. I say that was my study abroad for French wine. Came back into Boca Restaurant Group to kind of help them get all the restaurants, kind of into the position to grow and keep scaling. And in the mix of this, it was fascinating because wine is mind-blowingly intimidating. And I'm sure everyone on this call feels the same thing when people walk into your offices and want to talk about legal work. It can be terrifying. One, it can be a lot of money, which is amazing that what you guys do as an organization supports a lot of the families that really need it, and the finances just aren't there. But my biggest thing that I've always felt with wine is trying to find a way to disarm it. It's something that hospitality taught me, which is listening to who you're tasting with or dining with or telling stories to or whatever the thing is, but I'm here to help them. And I think it's the exact same thing as what great legal aid does. And as I keep growing my business, I'm learning a lot more about the legal world, and it's been a whirlwind because alcohol compliance is not a fun thing to deal with. But it's been a blast. So Hart Cru, as the current vision of what my business is, launched in 2015. This came because a lot of people were dining into the restaurants, coming in, seeing me. I would pour some juice, have some fun, tell some stories, and the conversation always came up, where can I get this? And before you know it, I'm running out the back door of the restaurants with a case of wine and putting it in their car at the valet and letting people go home with stuff. Doing that for a few years, I realized, hey, there's probably a business here, because I think the challenge that happens in my world is big brands, commercial properties, they have a marketing budget. They can get their wines out there and get them recognized by a lot of people. The farmers that I started meeting when I first started traveling, there is no budget. There is no money to market. A lot of these guys, even buying a plane flight to the US once a year, is really, really stressing their business model. So they never had the opportunity to send bottles to top critics, to get a page advertisement in Wine Spectator. So when I first started meeting these guys, and I'm like, you're making mind-blowingly delicious wine, and your family and your soul of who you are is just the core of what food and wine should be. It was like this raw duty in me to come back and tell their story. And so 15 years ago, 5 years ago in 2015, we finally decided to break away and fully launch a wine business to sell wine to consumers and also help with corporate events and so forth. But my whole vision was I wasn't going to sacrifice some things that I did not believe in. They had to be farmers that I really believed were producing wine at the best of their capacity. And they cared about sustainability. They believed in the bigger picture of what they were trying to do rather than just selling something. And it's been crazy. For 5 years, we've been having a lot of fun. COVID changed a lot, because I used to be, probably this weekend, I would have been in Washington Park with 150, 200 people pouring wine, running all over the place, bundled up with hats and scarves on, and it's the holiday market. But everything this year, there's nothing happening. And it's the biggest thing I missed for the last 9 months is being able to pour wine for people and tell stories. So it's really nice to be here to do some of that tonight. I'm really excited for that. So if we dive in, and as the agenda goes, I'll kind of talk about every wine for give or take about 10 minutes, and then you guys will break away. I really wanted to focus tonight on fairly small producers, but producers that I really believe have a voice into what they're doing at a very unique angle, and things I don't think people really get to taste very often. So with the white wine to start, and if everyone found their little printed booklet, there's some fun information and photos and things you can see. But the first wine that we will start with is this white wine, which I absolutely love. And it's really fun for me tasting this because I've been drinking it for so long, just as like an easy white wine to have. But I very rarely like analyze it and tell massive stories, because there's wines that I want to like overly think about and put on a pedestal and put a gold ribbon around. And then there's wines that are just so good, I just keep drinking them and I stop thinking about it, and they're fun. And I think that, frankly, that's what the whole wine world should be, is it delicious and do you like it? And there is no right or wrong. Wine is a personal preference. This whole 100-point score system, I think, is a unique conversation that I won't get into tonight, because everyone on this call tonight has their own palate. You have your own likes, and that's okay. So to me, when I'm looking for wines, I'm looking for quality of production. I know what my palate is, but I'm not trying to sell my palate to you. I'm looking for how is the wine made. And this wine is really, really fun because it's unique, because I think a lot of people, if you know wine a little bit and you know the term Gavi, which is on the front of the label, you know, if I go back into the 70s and 80s, you know, if I read all these old books on wine talking about, you know, Italian white wine coming into New York back in those days, Gavi was kind of the, you know, it's the house white wine. No one really talks about it. You might have a bad headache from it, and it's never meant to be something world class. And I challenge that, as do the farmers in the region. It's in a really unique spot because Gavi is actually the name of a town. So it's crazy because the location matters so much, and we are in northwestern Italy. We are south of Milan by about an hour, and we're north of Genoa on the Ligurian coastline. So if you think of where Cinque Terre is, if you think of that entire kind of Italian Riviera, if you may, which is actually a fairly narrow sliver of land, about 15 to 20 miles deep off the coastline, the Ligurian Sea in, you come to this town of Gavi in the region of Piedmont. And it's crazy because if you're driving through it, it's this old sleepy village, rolling hills, very kind of, it feels like you're kind of driving through like southern Ohio, not northern. Northern's way too flat. It's a little more rolling, but it kind of looks like here. There's woods, airflow is great. There's a lot of vegetation. It's slightly foggy, overcasty certain times of the year, but it's really bizarre because when you start walking into the fields and you like reach down into the ground and you pick up the earth, the soil in Gavi and the surrounding little villages is pure sand. And it's crazy because it literally looks like you're at the beach. And it's funny because if you go 2 more hours north, you hit the Alps. And if you go 30 minutes to the south, you're literally in the ocean. And it's the Cinque Terre. It's breathtakingly beautiful. But the way the Alps pushed up and erosion happened for you know, millions of years, it created this really unique soil structure for Gavi. And I love telling the story because every time I'm in Gavi, you can tell what they're trying to do. They don't sell their wine in the little shops there by like the case, by 12 bottles. They're sold in like 6-packs because they're easier to carry. Because all the people from Torino and Milan take the highways, they cut through, and on their way to the beach, they stop and grab their wine. You know, and this to me is like great Italian beach wine. It's light, it's refreshing, it's vibrant. It has that brightness that I really, really enjoy about having these wines kind of being this unique thing. So this is kind of a fun little white wine, but the other thing that really kind of impressed me with this is anytime I go to most wineries, they're usually making 5 or 6 or 7 different wines. Some grapes that make no sense, and we'll talk about that with the next wine coming in for the region, but they're usually making a wine that's made for the market, what actually sells. What do consumers really want rather than what are they passionate about or what grows well in their climate? And this family is, you know, they're 3 generations going back. They're lovely people. Their production levels are tiny. They only have about maybe 40 acres total on their vineyard site. but they only grow one grape. And I think this is fascinating to me, because instead of trying to branch out and making other things that might sell better, they just put their focus in making better Cortese, which is the grape varietal that makes up Gavi. So whenever you see Gavi on a front label, it has to be Cortese. And it's just like this vibrant, slightly salinity, citrus fruit, tree fruit, pears, lemon zest, all these things, but it's just an incredible kind of easy drinker. I think if someone loves Pinot Grigio, this to me is a much higher quality of Pinot Grigio. If you even like Sauvignon Blancs and you like that brightness and that refreshingness, I think Gavi does that from Ernesto. And it's funny, these guys come to Cincinnati once a year, and he is just the most humble, down-to-earth farmer I've ever met. And we've been supporting these wines for many years, and I think they're pretty delicious for what they do. I'm trying to read through the questions here to see if there's anything, and staying on time frame. So this is I agree, Ohio doesn't quite have a beach wine. We do need to have that happen at some point. And it's fun to me because I do think wine has a place. I think there's these incredibly rich, buttery, oaky Chardonnays. If you love them, great. There's many of them I truly enjoy. And to me, those wines work really well with certain food styles. Gavi to me is meant for light seafood. If I think of the dishes that were inspired from this part of the country, to me, this is like a great pesto wine. Pesto is originated from Genoa. So to me, if I'm taking basil and citrus and pine nuts in pasta and olive oil, this wine is perfect for that. If I'm making even one of the other classic dishes from Genoa is fried calamari, where you're taking squid, battering it, lightly frying it, I think the acidity here in this wine and the brightness just kind of cuts through it and refreshes everything. And I think it's really fun for that reason. But the whole point of it is just to focus on this. And the winery makes two different wines, so one grape, two different labels. And the way Gavi works as a village is it's this big hill, kind of think of what we have as Mount Adams here in Ohio, or you have these big rolling hills, and at the very top is usually the village, because the village then had the fortress view to understand the way troops and movement was happening for people, and you could see. But those hillsides around the main village is many times considered the best wines. And so there's a wine called Gavi de Gavi, which is the higher vineyard sites closer to the city center. And then Gavi, like this, is stepping down into a little bit where the foothills roll out, if you may, but this is still a very small area. And that lower area is where classic just Gavi comes from. Ernesto, though, is really fascinating because they're calling this wine La Rivi, which is on the very front label as well. And that is a single vineyard parcel. So all those fruit is literally coming from one vineyard, fairly large inside. There's pressing it, it's going in stainless steel. They're not trying to put oak on it. They're trying to just make this clean, focused, refreshing white wine. And we've been using this for years, as I said. This has been, for Soto Restaurant, this has been one of the house favorite white wines at that restaurant since we started 5 years ago. And there's a big following for easy drinking, just refreshing white wine. So I think it works really well. Where can I get Gavi locally is a fun wine here. Gavi locally, a lot of wine stores carry it. This producer by itself, I'm pretty sure Wine Merchant carries this. I know it's on my website if anyone wants to order it from there. And I think there's also a little bit of this maybe at Oakley Wines and the Rind. I think Stephanie supports it as well. But it's fascinating because Gavi, to me, it's all about the producer. I always talk about making wine is like finding a great chef. You can give 5 chefs a piece of meat, tell them to make a steak. One of them will probably, or 2 of them will outperform everyone else. They might have slightly different cooking techniques, but there's a level of craft that goes in and an understanding that I think is in the hands of a great winemaker. And to me, this producer, Piccolo Ernesto, his wines are just absolutely stunning, especially for the value proposition. And there's another question on here that asks the price point of this. All I'm going to say, these wines are incredibly affordable. Gavi, it's, I think, one of the hidden gems in the wine world for being affordable and drinkable. And I know me, during COVID times, I don't want to spend a ton of money on wine. I want to be able to have wine every night, every day. I don't want to think about it. It's kind of the crazy world that we're living in right now. And it's been a lot of fun. I feel bad for a lot of these winemakers. Getting into the background of all of this, even before COVID, you know, we had a lot of tariffs being put on by, you know, trade routes within the US. And now all of a sudden COVID hits and restaurants are closed worldwide, which used to be about 70% of the winemakers' backing of where their wines were going. So obviously more people are drinking at home, but the wineries are really struggling, just as every other business, as we fight through this, because as much as we might be drinking at home, not having the restaurants open is really, really hurting everyone. And it's just, we're all excited to get to 2021 and move on with the new year and get back to the life that we all knew. And I'm really excited for that. Yeah, it's fun. Does anyone have any questions about this wine?
Right.
And the wine that we were just mentioning on here is the Merlot, which is fascinating by itself. There was a crazy movie that came out a few years ago called Sideways down in Santa Barbara. I don't know who ever watched this movie, but it's pretty crazy to me because I have friends that had some of the wineries that were showcased in that film. And the people that were making Pinot Noir would have lines of tourist buses down the street and lines of people coming in, and they actually couldn't keep up with supply. And there's still 60%. So this is a
almost killed the industry.
Oh, it really did. I mean, the Merlot sales was pretty bad, and it's a grape I love. It's one of the most important grapes in France, and frankly, even in California, we might not talk about it, but Merlot is blended into a lot of wine. Merlot is fascinating because it gives richness. It gives a softness to the fruit and an aromatics. Cabernet gives tannic and structure. Petit Verdot can give, you know, kind of like pepper and kind of like roasted meat qualities. But Merlot is really, to me, it's one of the most important grapes, especially for like full-bodied red wines in the world, because Merlot is elegant. Merlot is lush. It has this softness that is approachable, where I think Cabernet Sauvignon or these other like noble grapes, if I go that route, can sometimes become a little too aggressive and too in your face and too one directional. Merlot doesn't do that. But this is a tiny producer that I found from a buddy of mine in New York. I'm a very, very well-recognized sommelier named Patrick Cappiello. He was Sommelier of the Year by Wine Spectator multiple times. He runs a massive Burgundy tasting Grand Palais. But he and I, many years ago, were always just talking about finding these like small producers, as I said earlier, that didn't have a voice. They didn't have a marketing budget. And frankly, they didn't have the confidence to really go after making world-class wine and getting noticed on an international stage. And even if you get noticed, a lot of the times they don't have the funds or the resources to really blow up and do something with it. So Julien Barrade was, give or take, about 21 years old when we first met him. And he was this tiny producer. So we're south of France, into an area called the Loire Valley. And Loire is crazy. It's the longest river in Europe. It's about 650 miles long, east to west, from the whole thing that the Loire runs. But when you go all the way to the western side, you're north of Brittany onto the Atlantic coast. So this is facing the Americas. And it's a really unique area called Sèvres-de-Maine, which is around the town of Nantes. And it's the far western side of the Loire. And this part of the continent back in the day used to be underground. So when continental plates crashed and things moved all over the place, it pushed up this part of France and took the seabed and raised it. This happens somewhat from volcanoes. So when you're into the vineyard sites, you'll find like a lot of volcanic soil structure, but you're also picking up hard granite, and then it's fossilized shellfish. It's crazy. Many times I've been walking around in the vineyards over there, and you'll pick up a rock and you'll see like a scallop shell or an uni shell right into the side of the rock. And what they're famous for is their white wine. An incredible kind of easy drinking white wine called Muscadet, which is you go to Paris and you sit at a bistro, a little round table, which I so miss traveling, and you'd sit on the side of the street and people watch, which is my favorite pastime, period. And you would like ask for a glass of white wine. You get two options in France. You get Macon, which is Chardonnay, which is richer, fuller, riper, or you get Muscadet, which is light, lean, and salty. But this is all these people make in this part of France, in this far western side of the Loire, is this grape called Muscadet. And that's what Julien Braud, this winemaker, became famous for. The challenge with everyone, unlike Piccolo or Ernesto, who just wants to perfect one grape varietal, he started playing around. And to do this, he had to break some laws because the French are very regimented. This is what we do. So when you look at the bottle, Braud is at the very top of it, the brand name. And I don't know if this is going to show up. If I go below it, it says the grape varietal, which is easy for everyone to understand. But below it says Vin de France, which is VDF is the shortening for sommelier talk, which by this term, it just means is wine of France. This is the most generic label you can put. There's no appellation, there's no laws. And the reason he did that is Merlot is not legal to be planted in his area. You can't plant it and say anything. The only thing you say is wine from France. So he has to put Merlot on it. But he believed that the climate, the soil, and his winemaking techniques could make really delicious Merlot. And he felt that people in his hometown and in Paris, which is his closest market close by, besides Tours, the big city in Loire, was let's plant some Merlot. It's soft, it's easy drinking, and our climate should grow it well, and let's make some Merlot. What's crazy here is, so Julien was 21 when he started making wine under his father. When he was 23, he convinced his dad, because before this, they were selling all their fruit to other people. They sold everything off. They gave away all their margins. No money was coming in. You know, you pay a quarter on the dollar. And he convinced his dad to let him start making wine off the family fruit. His dad gave him 2 acres. That's it. Of 15 acres that they have total, his dad gave him 2 acres to start making wine. I mean, this is like, you know, a few thousand bottles a year. This is not big production. So a few years later, his dad saw what he was doing. The wines were getting attention. And then he met this guy in New York, Patrick Cappiello, who kind of was his hero. I think everyone needs that. And this guy in New York City found these wines, and Julien was an instant star. The wines were being poured at every great wine bar in New York. Therefore, they ended up being poured in London and all the primary markets, but they still don't make much wine. So what I love with Merlot is that softness and that roundness. The wine does not see wood at all. I think a lot of people think wood is always a positive in wine. I disagree with that. I do think wood has a place in wine, but I'm buying wine to taste the fruit. I want to taste Merlot. So this is grown in a cooler climate, hence it's a little bit grippier. It's a little bit more acidic. It's a little bit more rustic because the wine just doesn't have the time to ripen. But I think it's absolutely delicious. It's a little bit savory. It's not too heavy. It's not too light. It's just perfect, to me, like crowd-pleasing red wine. And again, it's done at such a value because no one makes Merlot in this part of the Loire Valley. Does everyone like it? You know, I think alcohol is a fascinating thing because alcohol happens with climate change, like in general. So warmer climates, your sugar levels, your ripeness goes up just due to warmth of the region. Higher your sugars go, the higher your alcohols can climb. Obviously, there's still the hand of a winemaker and the vigneron, the people, you know, managing the vines, of when they went to pick. And this is a big debate that's happening right now in the wine world of what is proper alcohol content. And for years, well, one, global warming is happening, but for years we looked at alcohol content as a tool, but making sure that the wines were ripe and not bitter. The biggest challenge winemakers are looking for is making sure your seeds or stems on the grape themselves are no longer green. Otherwise you get bitter, like green tea characteristics, and it's not appealing to drink. So with global warming happening right now everywhere, we're seeing these cooler climate regions like, you know, Savoie de Maine in the Loire Valley becoming warmer and warmer. So the fruit is getting riper and riper early so they can pick earlier. So with the Julien Braud, this says 13% on label. I actually believe it's lower than that from tasting it. I think this is probably coming in at 12.5 if someone would actually test it, which to me is a great thing. We got really carried away with making these 15% alcohol wines, give or take 95 on out of California. But if I go back to the great wines of Cali, BV, and so forth in the late 70s, early 80s that were beating the French, they were 12.5% alcohol. If I look at the great Bordeaux houses, not the modernized ones, the old, great, classic French Bordeaux houses, their wines are 12.5 to 13%, depending on vintage. So to me, I also like to drink wine. It is my passion in my work, but I like lower alcohol in wine. I want to be able to consume a bottle and not wake up the next morning and wonder how I'm going to work. I like to have a glass of wine, and I think lower alcohol, one, it doesn't beat up food, and it also doesn't beat up me. So I'm all for it.
Now, I'm with you. I think the higher alcohol also gives your taste buds real fatigue. And if you're a foodie along with the wino, you know, the last few bites of your meal, they're not as enjoyable.
Agreed. And a lot of my favorite people, even in Cali, you know, Napa is one of the warmest wine growing regions on earth, besides like southern France, which we're about to go to, but this winemaker gets it. Alcohol matters. I mean, you know, there's a point where it's meant to go along with your food. It should not overpower your meal. And it's, you know, I think wine, you know, Europe looks at wine so differently. We in America for years, we wanted to put wine on a pedestal and make it a trophy item. In Europe, it's just part of dinner. You would actually never have a steak or a pasta without a glass of wine. It's the sauce that goes with the chef's, you know, beautiful dish. It's just a different way of looking at it. And alcohol, I think, really does change all of this. And I like seeing these wines that are low alcohol. I very much source them out. I saw in the chat after I ended my last talk that there's a lot of conversation. I saw two people mention this, a company called Winecraft, which is on the back of these bottles. So when I left the restaurant scene my first time, because I keep bouncing in and out, I think it will always be part of me. I joined my mentor, a gentleman here in town named Gordon Hugh, which is, you know, he's had a great life and his family has been in the beverage world for a long, long time. And he launched Winecraft in 2007, and I was sommelier and general manager for Boca then. And he instantly turned into my mentor, and in many ways, my best friend. I talk to him 5 or 6 times a day now. So my best friend is, you know, many more years of experience than I on my life. But he started Winecraft in 07, and I worked for him and helped him grow the business for 5 years. We put a lot of work into sourcing producers that we believe in and importing wines that we think are best in class at all price points. This is everything from like blue chip lay down collector's wines to like pop it at Tuesday at noon and stop worrying about it. So there's a lot of great wine there. But let me jump into the next wine here. So we're bouncing all over. I really wanted to hit multiple countries through the tasting today, and different styles of wines and varietals and so forth. And it's really unique because we did a light-bodied white wine from a cool climate, because you're in northern Italy. Even if we think of Italian Riviera, you think Riviera beach, it's still fairly cold there, especially in the wintertime. They had a massive snowstorm 3 days ago. My friends a few miles north of this place are sending me photos of their vineyards, and they're just a foot of snow already, which is crazy. This is very early for snow in that part of Italy. And then we jump into Loire Valley, which is a cool climate red region. But now we're going to a warm climate region. And to John's question about alcohol, there is something about the climate and the heat of the region that changes the alcohol content. But there is always the hand of the farmer. And this is where I think the world is shifting right now. So this next wine that you're going to is made by a winery called Alta Alea. And they are in Catalonia, which is the region. Catalonia is kind of fascinating because Catalonia is the southern part of Spain, or the northern part of Spain, but kind of on the French side around Barcelona. So it's hitting into southern France. Catalonia actually goes into French Pyrenees and also into around Spain, around the area of Barcelona. And for years, this area has always made wine. There's always been grapes there, but they never got recognized for being world-class wine. And I have a lot of appreciation for that because they were just making wine to drink, and it was wine for dinner, and it was wine for being on the table. Alta Alea is fascinating because they are within biking distance of downtown Barcelona. It might be a little bit of a hike, but like if you go to Barcelona and got a little city bird, like a red bike that we have downtown Cincinnati, and wanted to get some exercise in, you could bike to Alta Alea. It might be a little uphill on the way there, And then nice thing, after you have a glass or two up at the winery, it's all downhill. It's much easier getting there. But it's breathtakingly beautiful because the families own some amazing vineyards in this little, like, it's like a neighborhood called Alea. And the winery Alta is high. So this is the high vineyards of the area of Alea. So think of like East Walnut Hills or something in a community that's like a higher elevation outside of downtown, but coming into that area. And if you look at this photo, it's pretty breathtaking. I wish that the print job showed a little bit better, but this is this crazy amphitheater vineyard site of Alta Alea. And it's hard to see here, but if you look past the bottom in the amphitheater into the bowl, there's actually water there. You can see the Mediterranean. It's crazy how close to the Mediterranean this vineyard truly is. And what I love with them is the families had vines. They made, again, kind of table wine, sold a lot of stuff off, weren't focusing, but the two children that came in and the parents care so much about food and the wine that's being served around the table, and also their children and their families. They said, we don't want to spray any chemicals. We don't want any fertilizer. We don't want anything going into the vineyards that is not just 100% natural, organic to a T. And they started about 10 years ago really championing the idea of just making very, very low intervention wine. And to me, it's amazing what they're doing. So to farm like this, grapes are really finicky, and it can be really, really tricky to grow great wine without doing any non-traditional things into the vineyards of spraying and whatnot. Alta Alea is pretty blessed because their vineyard sites have this constant breeze coming in from the Mediterranean, and that breeze allows for incredible farming to happen. Their biggest challenge that they have is the weather is too perfect. It can get too hot. So when too hot happens, your alcohol levels climb up, and all of a sudden you have a wine that's 14.5, 15% alcohol, which is what happens with a lot of the winemakers there. And you taste a lot of other wines from really warm regions, and the wines start tasting raisinated. So what I love with this is made by Alta Alea. It says GX on the front, which is Garnacha. Grenache is the classic grape varietal name for it everywhere else in the world, but Garnacha probably has about 7 different names, 8 different names worldwide. It's all the same grape. It's a really tricky grape to grow for a few reasons. It has a very thick skin, so if you don't manage it properly in your vineyard site, it will get really tannic and really leathery. It also has the potential of ripening to a point where alcohol levels can go really, really high really quickly. What I like with Alta Alea is their farming and their attention is in their vineyard site. So when I taste this wine versus the Merlot, the fruit goes really red. It's really vibrant. It's cherry-like. It's raspberry. It's really fruity. It's really great. I see someone on John's camera I know very well. So what I like here is the wine's really vibrant and it's light, but instead of like the Merlot, which is more black fruit and rustic and kind of like fruity.
Fun. You have to tell me how it goes when you're done.
This wine has this juiciness and this berryness to it, but in no way do I taste raisinated characters, and I have this vibrancy to it that I think is just so enjoyable to drink. And I think the alcohol on this is climbing up there. Hence, due to where we are, it's outside of Barcelona. It's at 14.5% alcohol. So this is a unique way to think about alcohol. I think if someone goes to a bar right now and orders a Bud Light, I think a Bud Light is about 3% per drink. So that 1.5% difference between these two wines is a half a beer. That's a half a beer a drink. That's a lot. That really adds up when you think about that. And it's a unique way of thinking about like percentage of alcohol and how that affects you at the end of the night. But Alta Alea to me is really one of the moving forces into the Spanish wine scene because they're doing low intervention, incredible quality of wine, and they have this mind-blowing vineyard sites to produce wine that they don't really have to do much work in the vineyard rather than just go out and cut some leaves and trim the grapes. There's a lot more work than that, but it's a lot simpler than trying to grow wine in cool climate. And I think the wine is pretty delicious. I saw a question here. Results from using organic grapes. Is there any magic in results from using organic grapes? What I will say about, I think, with organic or natural or unsprayed or low intervention wines, I do think you get more aromatics and more savory and more flavor out of the wine. I think when you start putting a lot of things on wines to kind of like stabilize them, you lose the nuances and the flavor profile. So if I think about this in a very dumb way, I think organic wines, maybe you can taste 50 or 60 different things between aromatics and flavor profile. But if you actually go through filtration levels and stabilizing your wines and putting it through all these filters, you maybe will taste like 20 or 25. I think you lose a lot of the depth of character that happens from farming with low intervention. Another question was, are there sulfites naturally occurring? Yes, when fermentation happens, when yeast eats sugar, wine automatically will naturally create a little bit of sulfites in wine, which is what many people are allergic to and have you know, you can't breathe after you have wines with too high sulfites. Naturally though, what you get, and this is me being geeky, is about 6 parts per million of liters. So this is very, 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 very tiny. Organic wine in California is allowed to put 80 parts per million of sulfites added into wine, 80 parts. This is a lot. Wine in California, generically conventional wine that you can go buy at big grocery stores, has over 400 parts per million of sulfites. So it adds up. But I just believe in let grapes grow, farm it to the best of the ability. And this is what a lot of my favorite winemakers in the world, they don't get geeky, they don't get dogmatic, they don't get on a pedestal about it. What they want is they just want to make delicious wine. And when I've tasted a lot of wines around the world, I find wines to be more delicious the less you mess with them in the vineyard sites. So to me, it's a lot of backbreaking labor. It is farming at its core. And Alta Alea to me is truly doing, I think, some of the most innovative farming in Spain. But this is Grenache, which definitely becomes riper. It's a little bit more berried fruit, and it's definitely showing that it's from a warm climate rather than a cool climate. And I think we are at time, because I can ramble on for hours.
Kevin, you're awesome. Thank you so much.
Amazing.
Bravo to Kevin. Kevin and everyone at Hart Cru, thank you for making tonight possible. I've learned a lot and enjoyed wines, maybe too many to wrap this up, but and very fun and seeing so many familiar faces. So thanks to you. Thank you to the Ohio State Bar Foundation and also all of our individual sponsors for making this happen. Every dollar you donated here tonight will be poured back into our community with a multiplying effect. Grow PBPO, all of your great smiling faces. Thanks to you for making tonight possible and for being our delivery elves. And Ellen and Veronica from staff, thank you for making this run so smoothly from behind the scenes. And thanks to the rest of you for being here and helping us carry out our mission of attorneys strengthening nonprofits, which also then strengthens our community. So cheers to all of you. Happy holidays. Happy first day of Hanukkah for those of you that celebrate that. And we will be putting everyone into a breakout room. If you'd like to go into one more, I know Leadership Cincinnati class of 43 showed up tonight. So we're going to spin everyone back into one more group if you'd like. But cheers to all of you and thank you for supporting us.